Hi, everybody. My name is Hayley. Today's write-in is all about inciting incidents. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive in. So we've already kind of introduced ourselves. There's a ton of different people in here working on a ton of different projects, which is so exciting. So let's just go ahead and dive in. All right. So an inciting incident, which is what we're going to be focusing on today, is like the launch pad for your story. The inciting incident is the piece that launches your main story into action. This typically occurs within the first act of your story, so it's something towards the beginning, and typically means that there is some type of significant change for the main character in some way impacting their life and again kind of launching them into the story to come. So your inciting incident is when the action kicks off. It's when things start to get rolling, where if you think about your character as kind of existing in this previous life before, from the launch pad, from the inciting incident, everything has changed and they're going to be moving forward. Thanks, Travis. I clearly did not proof my slides very carefully. So the inciting incident is going to launch people into the action. It's also going to fully engage the reader with the story and serve as an indicator of what's to come. And we're going to work through exercises that make this a little bit more clear. But our goal here is, again, to make sure that this inciting incident kicks off the action and is a preview of what's to come. So we want the inciting incident to be related to the overall conflict that's going to drive our story. Good question, Jack. We're going to get to myths about this in a second. So there are lots of myths about inciting incidents, one of which is exactly what Jack just asked. Does it have to be in the first chapter? No. So one of the main myths of inciting incidents is it has to be the first thing that happens in your story. This cannot be further from the truth. An inciting incident does not have to be the first thing that happens in your story. In fact, in many instances, the inciting incident is something that happens one or two or three or further chapters into the story. It almost always happens in the first act, so it's happening towards the beginning, but it's not the first thing that happens. It's also not the hook. So if we think about a hook as kind of like a cold open, that first scene that draws people into your story, your hook is not the same thing as an inciting incident. So the hook is that kind of first scene that you give the reader to drop them into your world, to show them what's going to happen. But that's not the same thing as the inciting incident. So I want to talk about this in relationship to the new book or to the new Netflix show, which is coming out, Shadow and Bone. So those of you who are with me for Fantasy Week know that I really love YA fantasy. And one of the best ones is by Leigh Bardugo. It's going to be a new Netflix series called Shadow and Bone. Shadow and Bone has a really great, or one of the books in that series, Six of Crows, has a really great description of hook versus inciting incident. So the hook is a cold open. We open on this scene where this kind of medical experiment is going wrong. That does not, that is the hook. So it tells us that something kind of weird and crazy is happening, but actually none of the main characters are in it, right? So none of the main characters are in that hook, or the inciting incident that gets the characters involved in the action actually comes later, right? So hook is that kind of first thing that gets the reader into the world and makes them really excited about what's happening. Inciting incident happens to the characters, and it typically happens later. Another myth is that the inciting incident has to raise a lot of questions. It doesn't. It could just kick things off. Now, I'm going to check in the chat because there are a couple questions about this before we move on. So one of the questions was, should each scene have an inciting incident? Yes. So we can think of a scene as kind of like a microcosm of a whole story. So if your story has your beginning, your inciting incidents, your plot points, your midpoints, your falling action into the climax and that type of thing, or your climax and your falling action, that type of thing, the same is done for every scene too. So StoryGrid's kind of approach is that each scene is almost like a mini story in itself. So it'll have all of the pieces of the scene too. So it would have the beginning, every scene would have an inciting incident, every scene would have a climax, and then it would have a resolution into what comes next. So yes, that is one of the things that you can think about when editing, that your scene is, every single scene should have kind of the structure of of the inciting or of your overall novel. Here, we're going to be talking specifically about inciting incidents as they relate to the overall novel. So inciting incident as it relates to the hook to your story, not into a specific scene. Okay, just looking at the chat quickly. So can you have an inciting process? That's a good question. So the inciting incident is typically the point when things change for your character, that launch pad where you're moving up to it. And this kind of ties into a second question that people are having. Can you have several? Typically, you're going to have that one kind of launch pad that really kicks off the action. But that being said, there might be places before that that start to hint at the action. And it depends kind of what story structure you follow. And I apologize, I'm just responding to the question, so I don't actually have slides related to this. So sorry for all the talking at you. But in something like the hero's journey, right, where we have the hero finally choosing to go off into the new world towards the end of at the end of Act 1 into Act 2, there are pieces leading up to that sort of kind of kick the action started, right? So you can think about it as there are places where action begins, and then the kickoff is when the character finally decides to leave and move into the new world. So when you're thinking about kind of the inciting incident process, I would say that most of the things that you're thinking about as inciting incidents are all kind of things leading up to the big final one, right? So it's like almost like they're breadcrumbs or clues kind of leading up to that kind of main action point that kicks things off. Yes, and so it's kind of like foreshadowing. So depending on how you structure your story, it could be like foreshadowing. Again, it could be, if you're, again, following something like Hero's Journey, it could be the hero kind of refusing the call and deciding that they don't want to get involved, only to have something big happen where they have to, right? So it depends on what you're writing and how you're writing it. Okay. So I'm going to give some examples of inciting incidents because I think that will help clear up this. So here's an example of an inciting incident in a book and movie that many of us are familiar with. Hagrid tells Harry he's a wizard. So this is the inciting incident because it kicks off everything that comes next. Now, I want you to focus on this one, and I chose this one specifically because a lot of us are familiar with Harry Potter. Note that Hagrid tells Harry he's a wizard pretty far through, or not pretty far through, but not in the first chapter, not in the second chapter. Several things have happened before Harry learns that he's a wizard. He goes to the zoo and ruins the glass with the snake, right? He starts to receive all the letters. The Dursleys leave and then go hide out on this island to try to escape all the letters. So there's quite a bit of action that takes place before Hagrid finally tells Harry he's the wizard. So at this point, then the action in the book shifts. So it shifts from Harry trying to kind of figure out what was going on, what was wrong for him, and then moving forward into this action, right? So from this point forward, the inciting incident is actually a moment of clarity for Harry. So if we go back to our myths before, one of the myths is that an inciting incident has to raise a lot of questions. Here, the inciting incident is actually giving clarity to Harry. So clarity, now all of a sudden Harry realizes, oh, that's what was happening. All of those kind of confusing things that happened, all of that conflict is because of this answer. So that being said, this is the inciting incident. It gives Harry clarity of what's going to come next for him. Okay, so let's keep moving because I want to get us to our sprints. So I'm going to just take a look at the chat here. Yes, so the placing, so Daryl says, does the placing of the inciting incident in the first act hold true for all genres? Most, but again, you can play with story structure. So for everything in writing, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, and you can think about what makes sense for your story. So for instance, in the Harry Potter example, the inciting incident as an act of clarity for Harry made sense, right? That's how J.K. Rowling wanted to structure that. She wanted it to be a moment of clarity for Harry about what was happening to him before and then moving forward. Now, Marv's idea of thinking about the inciting incident as a call to adventure, if we shift over to maybe thinking about Star Wars, right? So for Luke doesn't necessarily have the same kind of moment of clarity, right? Luke has this call to adventure that happens to him. He finds R2-D2, he learns his aunt and uncle are killed, and then he's kind of whisked into this galactic warfare, right? So it's not necessarily a moment of clarity about his past. That comes a little bit later, right? That comes later on in the Star Wars structure, but his inciting incident is moving forward. Yes. So, and again, I think with Hagrid showing up, there's obviously future questions. So any moment in your story, like the inciting incident, is not going to answer all questions, and it's going to set up future conflict. So that's kind of that tension. The clarity that Harry has at that point is what had happened to him. So Harry now knows who he is and what's wrong with him. But then again, the key piece is that the inciting incident sets up what comes next. So if we go back a couple slides just quickly, one of the things is that the inciting incident serves as an indicator of what's to come. So Harry not only gains clarity about what happened before, but then we also get an indicator of what's to come. So in Harry Potter, we now know that Harry is a wizard, that there's this magic school, that's what's going on. So again, that opens up a whole, 6 more books worth of questions. But at that point, again, we have clarity on who Harry is. So it's answering one main question and then setting up into his next thing. Okay, so I think the best way for us to start practicing this is to just think about it, to practice it and think about how it's related to our writing. Because today we're not lecturing, we're writing. That's our goal today. So the first thing we're going to do today in our first sprint is to work on our inciting incidents. And just again, I know we have a lot of new people here. So the structure of the rest of this particular session will be less lecture and more action. So what we're going to be doing is working on specific writing prompts ourselves. So the first one is going to work on your the essential elements of your inciting incident. So what I want you to do for the next 5 minutes is answer the following 4 questions. First, what's the urgency of this inciting incident? So how is this going to affect your protagonist in the next couple days, couple hours, couple months, right? So first, think through urgency. What's going to affect your protagonist soon? So what's the urgency surrounding your inciting incident? Second, what questions does it raise, right? So the inciting incident might be a moment of clarity about what came before, but just like someone in the chat said, it's going to provide a reason. Your inciting incident needs to provide a reason to keep reading. So with Harry, we learned that Harry was a wizard. That explains all of the, all of the weird things that were happening to him. But we now have a reason to keep reading because we want to find out what happens when he gets to Hogwarts. Okay. So your inciting incident could give clarity, but it also should raise questions about what comes next in your story. You also need to think about how your character reacts, and then also how this inciting incident is going to change your character's life. So I'm going to stop talking now. You will have 5 minutes to answer these questions. I'm going to start the timer here, and I will come back when we have about a minute left, and then we will share out in the chat. So these are the 4 questions you're thinking about. Again, this is an opportunity to just write as much as you can without stressing too much about it. Starting the timer now. Okay, we have about a minute left. Okay, we're bringing it back together. And as you can see, there are people who are, some of our old hats are dropping their answers into the chat. Now, I saw that someone had a question about the urgency. So as you're sharing in the chat what you wrote, if there was a favorite sentence, what was challenging or easy, I want to address the urgency question. So Kathleen asks, or just says, I'm struggling with the urgency question. Now, I think this is perfect to look at Marv's example. So Marv says that the inciting incident sends Elizabeth on a quest to discover why she was given a pendant by a stranger. So when we're talking about urgency, we need to think about why Elizabeth is going on that quest right now versus why she's just like, I'm going to put the pendant in my closet and chill with it for a little bit, right? So the answer, the idea of urgency is, what about this inciting incident makes the person need to take action right now? So for instance, if you're finding a pendant, or if you are if you're finding the pendant and the pendant is imbued with kind of magical powers that make things start happening in your house, right? So things start happening without your control. Or if you're not in kind of a fantasy genre and you are in a crime genre and you find a pendant and then all of a sudden people are trying to kill you, right? Or people think you've stolen it and then you have to go on the run, right? That's where urgency comes in. So we need to think through what is affecting or what is encouraging our protagonists to take action right now. If we think back to the Harry Potter example, part of the urgency there is that Harry needs to go to school, right? So Harry needs to go for the start of term, September 1st, right? So that's why Hagrid is there. There's inherent urgency in that. Harry needs to decide what's happening and what to do with that because school starting, right? So urgency can be someone chasing you and trying to murder you to find your pendant, or it can be, in Harry Potter, school starting and you need to get started for school. Looking at some of the urgency examples here, so Kathy has that the urgency is someone close to her passed away under gruesome circumstances. And there's kind of the question, when somebody dies, there's inherent urgency and we need to figure out what happened with this kind of strange death, right? So there's inherent urgency and we need to figure out what went wrong then. Okay. So Kathleen, so your example, her grandfather dies and she has to go live with her aunt. So what can you add in about why she has to go live with her aunt, right? So she could, maybe the house that she was living in with her grandfather, right? Yes. So her being a minor adds that urgency. So she can't live alone in the house that her grandfather had, so she has to go with her aunt. So I think it's important to recognize that urgency is not always life or death stakes. Yes, yeah, overthinking it, definitely. So urgency is not always life or death stakes. A lot of, in fantasy examples or in crime examples, in a lot of those instances, the inciting incident and the urgency are life or death stakes. But if you're writing a memoir, or if you're working on something that's just, just more kind of just fiction, right? Then, or romance or something like that, it doesn't have to be urgency. But if if you're working in romance and you're doing kind of an arranged marriage or an arranged date situation, maybe they need a date for the ball coming up or something like that. Any of those can add that kind of sense of urgency, that sense of timeliness, that are not always life or death stakes. Okay, so just taking a look here. And yes, I will send out the slides after. So we've got a couple people who are being expelled from their house. So H. Starling says the urgency of the inciting incident is that she has nowhere to go. So yes, so she's trying to find a way to maintain relationships after being expelled. So the expulsion creates this urgency of finding somewhere to live. Let's see. Okay. So Thomas, Sandra's example, has a prophecy read to him, right? And so this prophecy is kind of kicking off this knowledge that he has. Norman has an attack by an unknown weapon, right? So that creates inherent urgency there. Wesley, they're being chased by wolves and need to seek shelter and safety, definitely. Yes. Great. So it looks like you guys are all doing a really wonderful job of doing inherent questions and thinking through the questions about like who, Michael has, who was the companion? Why was he, what happened with this? Why does his mother think there's foul play, etc.? Great. Okay. Yeah, impending and unavoidable war, that is definitely very, very urgent. Yeah, Liz, it's easy when you have questions to answer. We'll always do. There's a mix. When you have questions, you can write quickly. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and now we're going to take what we've built and we're going to keep working through our second two prompts. Okay, so our second prompt is to take what we've thought. So we have the basics of our scene. And now I want you to dive deeper into how to write this scene. Okay. So not just what happens, the basics of the scene, but how to make this scene come to life. So I want you to be thinking about these three things. First, what dramatic events will happen, right? So if you think about the inciting incident from Harry Potter, it's raining, right? It's torrential downpour, and there's thumping outside, and they're on this island surrounded by water, and all of a sudden there's a big knock on the door, and Hagrid comes in, and he's this half giant, and he's huge, and there's like fight, the Dursleys try to stand up to him, and then he gives Dudley a tail, and all that type of stuff, right? So it's not just you're a wizard, Harry, right? So it's not just that one moment, but the whole scene has a bunch of different pieces that are kind of leaning together or working together to create that urgency. So this is what I want you to think about here. What are the dramatic events that are going to happen in this scene, right? And this is where we can kind of go back to the idea that we were talking about before, that each scene has an inciting incident. So if we take that scene from Harry Potter and we say that the moment Hagrid says, "You're a wizard, Harry," is the inciting incident in that scene, then everything that came up before it was kind of that action leading up to that, right? So he knocks on the door, he comes in, he's banging on the door, right? And then maybe the climax is when he gives Dudley the tail or that type of thing. But again, there are going to be pieces of your scene. So I want you to think through, we don't need to go too deep into scene structure here. We're not doing any in-depth plotting, but I do want you to think through just what are some dramatic elements that will happen in this scene beyond just that kind of lightning moment when something happens. I also want you to think what external forces are involved. So think about setting, think about other characters, think about secondary or minor characters. Just, are there external forces involved here? And then also we want to think through what themes from your story will this show? What threads will be opened from here that you will talk about later? So for instance, if you are writing a romance and the theme of your romance is finding connection in unlikely places, maybe you set the setting of your scene in like a bus depot, or I don't know where is unlikely to find romance. But again, think through how can you, going back to that idea of foreshadowing, how can you think through what will come later in your story, and what can you kind of imbue into this initial scene to give a picture of themes that will come later. So this is a little bit more challenging. So we have 7 minutes for this. Again, you Karen, we're going to be answering the questions. We're going to put this all together into a scene in our next exercise. But for this one, we're just going to be thinking through these. So you can do it in list format. You can do it in mind map format, that type of thing. Yeah, Jack, romance in a McDonald's toilet. That would maybe be unlikely if that's your theme. Okay, so let me go back. I'll start my timer and we'll see you in 7 minutes. All right, you have about 1 minute left. Okay, so we'll bring it back together as many people are doing. You can go ahead and drop it into the chat. Now, I do want to address one of the questions that came up from Travis, and I think it just moved quickly in the chat, was if the themes of your inciting incident can be very different from the themes of the rest of the story. So typically you want your inciting incident to set up what comes next, right? So to set up the conflict that's coming next, to set up the main themes, the main ideas, the main, in some ways the main protagonist and antagonist and their personality and that type of thing. That being said, if your inciting incident is a big change of state, right? So if the theme before, if your protagonist is changing from being a coward to being a hero or something like that, then there can be changes. So it can reflect a state change. But that being said, again, you should still give a preview of what's to come, right? So your inciting incident almost always lays a hint of what's to come, either in theme, in plot, etc. So yes, that is something to keep in mind, that even if there is a dramatic kind of state change from before the inciting incident to after, it's still important to think through how it relates to the character, and the overall story you're telling, right? So whether that's the themes in the story, whether that's the plot, etc. Okay, so gonna take a look at these in a second. So I know somebody's asked about how often we can do these. So these happen every month. They happen the fourth Tuesday of every month. So you can come to them. But that being said, if you all want to do more of these daily writing exercises, some of us on here are from ProWritingAid University, and in that program, we do. Daryl's one of them who just posted. So we do daily writing exercises in ProWritingAid University, and you'll have daily writing prompts, feedback from your peers, and feedback from me. We're doing a challenge on fantasy writing right now, and then we're starting one on show don't tell April 1st. So if you guys want to do more of this, you can join ProWritingAid University. We actually just sent out a 50% off coupon for year one for that. So I'll drop that at the end. But yeah, we do daily writing in there. It's really fun. And then we're doing a workshop on dialogue this week too, which will be cool. Okay, and then you get on-demand courses. I'll talk about it more at the end. Okay, so let's go into what people have. All right. So I really like thinking about the dramatic effects that we have here. So the dramatic, the ideas of, so Sam there's a gunshot heard, the house is broken into, the sky dog shows up, right? So there's multiple kind of dramatic incidences leading up to that final moment with the inciting incident. Sets up mystery. So Jax is setting up mystery, which is great. It deals, sets up themes of class, societal power, and race, and kind of coming to terms with who you are. Great. Miss Marlena says the theme will show Aiden's desperation to save his mother and his people, and introduce also personal struggle with the demands of his position. That's a great example of how that character reacts in that moment will set up what comes next. Okay, so Chucks are showing desperation and despair, the draconian nature of the authorities in city. Great, so that'll probably be something that they're fighting with throughout, is the draconian nature of those authorities. Excellent. Um, Deb, I think that's you, right? Deb Novotny. Glad that you're enjoying. Deb says that she's enjoying the university and it's well worth. Deborah, that she's enjoying the university and it's well worth it. Thank you. Okay, so continuing to sprint number 3, we're going to put it all together now. So what we're going to do is put together what you've written in the first exercise. So the basics of your inciting incident, the questions it raises, now the themes, and now we're going to write the fully fleshed out scene. So from the moment the scene starts through to the end, our goal is to write the fully fleshed out scene for your inciting incident. This is going to be the longest amount of time. We'll have 10 minutes. And the goal is, again, to take all of the questions that you answered before and put it into the scene. So all of those pieces that you were thinking about, the themes, the questions, the dramatic events, right? Now it's time to write something totally the whole scene from start to finish. Again, you can think about within your scene as your scene having its own inciting incident, its own climax, its own end. Or you can just kind of free write and see what happens. But hopefully we have a good basis of what you have here. If you wrote something previously, totally fine to edit or keep working on it. But again, our goal is to come out of this with a full scene for your inciting incident, or as close to it as possible. So 10 minutes for this one. Write as much as you can. Just don't stop to edit. Just keep working. Let's go. Okay, bringing it back together. We've got some really great insights here. I think Sam and Carol both said that one of the things they learned was that their inciting incident was actually a little bit different than what they actually thought too. And I think that's really common, that we think the insight, again, this inciting incident, almost, I feel like the launch pad metaphor that I used before was maybe incorrect. In some ways, the inciting incident is the bridge, right? It's the bridge from the before state into what comes next, right? The next action. And so that's one of the ways we should think about what finally pushes someone over the edge from where they were, right, into what comes next. And depending on what you're writing, the stakes of that will be very different, right? So if they're meeting in a McDonald's bathroom or McDonald's for like romance, like Jack was talking about, then the stakes are a lot lower than if it's a life or death kind of fantasy situation, which is totally normal. But again, we want to think about that inciting incident, the action, as the bridge into what comes next, right? The bridge into the themes, the bridge into the next section, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the things that people have in here. And I totally know, I think Emma, I saw someone just in the chat say this. Yes, I know the Zoom chat limits how many words you can write, which is totally fine. It's okay if you don't share the whole thing. I know we can't. Okay, so let's see. All right. Just taking a look here. So I really like what Sandra has done for setting the setting. We've got dim light filling the room. That the protagonist had no clue how to get back to his world. I like how Norman has started to kind of outline what's going to come next in the scene, right? And some of the pieces that they're going to. One of the things Norman's highlighted is that in the scene, they'll talk about the inappropriate evening wear of the characters and their emotional detachment. That will start to set up some of the themes that come later, which is great. Sam, I like that you've used the acrid metallic smell hanging in the air. Smell is one of those sensory words that's super powerful, but we don't use it too often, which is great. I'm glad to see it there. Okay. Let's see. Chuck, I know you had a question, just getting down to it. Should there be a more concise bit for the inciting incident? So this is where some of how you look at the scene will shift. And Chuck, you're a ProWritingAid University member too. One of the things that we talk about in one of the courses in there is how to edit scenes. So this is one of the things we talked about in this overall program, is that a scene in itself has its own inciting incident, its own climax, etc. So it's almost like it's inciting incident inception, right? Like your inciting incident, the scene of your inciting incident has its own inciting incident within the structure of that scene. So that's one of the things that we can go into more depth with in a second section. But yes, like within your specific scene, you will have set up leading to the inciting incident within that scene, as well as a climax to the inciting incident scene as well. So you'll have all of those pieces. Awesome. Okay, we're just about out of time. So thank you all so much for joining. I will send out the slides as well as the replay for this so that you can work on the exercises by yourself. For those of you on this call who are not part of ProWritingAid University, I am dropping a link to in the chat. Also, if you're on our email list, check your email. We're doing a 50% off sale right now for ProWritingAid University using the code WRITER21, I think. Let me just double check, because you can save a lot of money. But these happen every single day in ProWritingAid University for the whole year. We do them every single day, do prompts that you work on and that you can work on with other people. It's 50/21. So 5021 is the promo code. Marv, Deborah, Daryl, there's a bunch of people in this group right now who are part of that. We work on these prompts every single day. You also get access to on-demand courses. So the one I was referencing for Marv is an editing course on editing your manuscript. We have one premiering very soon in there on crafting great characters. Yes. So Deborah, yeah, we have prompts in the Facebook group. We also, if you don't want to be in the Facebook group, you don't have to. You can also just do the challenges on your own. And then your membership also includes on-demand courses. So we have one on editing your manuscript, one on outlining right now, and a third that I cannot remember. And we're doing one on crafting crafting legendary characters, which is coming out soon. If you join today, I know a couple people have, we're finishing up our Fantasy Writers Week challenge, which is great. And then our Fantasy Writer Month challenge. And then we're starting a new challenge on April 1st. So if you join right now, you will be able to get in for April, which is great. And April's challenge is all on craft and show don't tell. It's going to be awesome. The sale is until Friday, so check it out because it's 50% off. And it's a good deal. We also have a monthly membership if you guys would prefer. Okay, so let me just drop that in one more time. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you to all of the ProWritingAid University friends who are telling us, everyone, that's so great. Thank you. We have so much fun in there writing challenges. So enjoy. It's ProWritingAid University links there. The code is 5021 on the yearly subscription. So it's 50% off yearly, 5021. Check your email as well, because that went out today. And if you don't have it, email hello@ProWritingAid.com and I will get it to you. Thank you all so much. We'll send out the Q&A tomorrow and we'll talk to you. Oh, let me just save the chat. Good idea, Daryl. So I saved the chat and then we're sending out a replay of this with the slides tomorrow. So everyone have a great rest of your Tuesday. I hope it's as sunny and warm and almost spring-like as it is here. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye.